Welcome everyone to the Roots2Suits podcast. We're here for episode 3. The podcast is aimed at highlighting unique individuals that make up the global cannabis space. My name is Jameson Welbourn, and I'm joined by my brother and co-host, Graydon Welbourn. On today's episode, Harry Rose of Rosette Wellness. Rosette Wellness is a fully licensed cannabis company based out of Humboldt, California, that we're going to learn a lot about. I connected with Harry by first trying some of the hash that he made through his good friend Kylie of Indux Lab at the Emerald Cup. And the minute I tried that, I knew I needed to reach out to this individual. And we've formed an absolute friendship, and I've got nothing but respect and admiration for what he's done and who he is in the space. And so without further ado, I'd love to welcome both Graydon and Harry to the show.
Thanks for the intro, Jason.
Anytime. Thanks so much for taking the time, man. We really appreciate it.
No problem.
Before we jump into Rosette and what you've got going on with Wedge and a bunch of cool new products, I wanted to take people back and for our viewers, tell us a little bit about yourself and where you're from.
Sure. I grew up in New York, and I'm the son of a very advanced mechanical engineer that specializes in a lot of different things, but electronics and technical design of different components for electronics was really his specialty. And so I grew up the son of an inventor, which is really how my mind works. You know, I can't help but think like an engineer if you grow up under an engineer. So ever since I was just a few years old, I learned how to read schematics and wire breadboards and learn about circuitry, and then that developed into logic and different forms of computer systems. I started programming in machine language and C+ and so on when I was really young. I had a computer at a very early age, and computers weren't what they are today, you know, very simplistic, and you had to program almost everything that you needed. So it was a different time. Over time, I developed a love for stagecraft. I have a deep love for music. I've always been surrounded by musicians and also played music myself. I took private piano lessons and saxophone lessons, learning jazz and classical music when I was very young for about 10 to 12 years. And whenever I went to a concert, I always wanted to be up on stage, you know, setting up the instruments and working with the lighting and sound. And believe it or not, that actually lent itself to me getting out of high school and going right on the road with rock and roll bands, from regional to national bands as a backline tech initially, setting up musical instruments and traveling the world. And eventually that led into me being interested in lighting. These small bands, they never have enough people on their crew, so we fill in where we can. I learned lighting, I learned sound, I learned a lot of different things, but lighting and electrical really stuck with me because of my background and because of my upbringing. And so the long and short of it is, when you cruise around and you travel enough, California really is the mecca in terms of stagecraft and what's going on. I landed in the Bay Area in the very early 90s, 1991, permanently, and moved out there because there's a lot of stagecraft going on. There's a lot in between, but I was taken into Local 16, IATSE Local 16, which is the stagehand union out of San Francisco. And they did a huge amount of projects and events and launches from some of the biggest players in Silicon Valley at that time. So for me, I was able to stay at home a lot and travel a little still with these corporate entities like Apple. I did all the product launches with Steve Jobs, and Oracle with Larry Ellison, Sun Microsystems with Scott McNealy. Did a ton of work with even Bill Gates with Microsoft, launching anywhere from Windows XP to the original Xbox. Like I said, a lot of Apple work, and we traveled around as well as did a lot of shows. And that led me to actually working way too much, coming out of working way too much, touring as a rock and roll roadie. I ended up getting very sick and had to come off the road, had to stop doing what I was doing because I was actually dying. It happened pretty quickly. I developed this autoimmune disease that was attacking me in a very violent way through IBD and COPD. And the long and short of it is, I had to come off the road.
How old were you at this point, Harry?
Let's see, I was in my 30s at this point, and all my doctors, I came off the road and I felt a little bit better, and I went back and I kept on ebb and flowing until it got to the point where I really couldn't even complete a project, and everybody on the event was carrying me. And I did have that brotherly love, but it wasn't cool anymore. I couldn't work. And so I stopped doing the shows to try to get better, which is when I moved to Humboldt County permanently. Prior to that, we had obtained property, my wife and I, to learn a lot about living off grid, farming our own produce, and starting to cultivate our own medicine. Little did I know what was going to really happen. It was right around the time when my wife was pregnant with my first child, my son Liam, that I was really in very bad shape. And this all sort of culminated at once, where I came off the road, moved to Humboldt full time. My son was born, and so on. And the long and short of it is, I tried all of the Western medicine that I could. I tried steroids and antibiotics and anti-inflammatories and all these various drugs that they will give you for autoimmune disease, but there really isn't a solution. So then I looked to alternative medicine, and I tried several, one of which that almost killed me the second time. And so I was really eager to get better because my son was just born and I really wasn't ready to go, and it was getting pretty bad. And the long and short of it is, there's a lot of detail here.
Harry, can I just ask a quick question? So was it just severe exhaustion? What were you kind of experiencing? I'm curious.
Well, when it comes to autoimmune disease, your body's literally attacking itself. So I had my large intestine was twice the diameter outside that it was supposed to be, and half the diameter inside that it was supposed to be. Nothing was really digesting properly. I had severe internal bleeding, and I was bleeding out of all orifices. I couldn't hold food down. I was on the verge of going septic and losing tremendous amounts of weight. I also started to have flare-ups with my lungs because I did smoke cigarettes when I was younger. I stopped, but my body was attacking anything that was weak. And so I was having a lot of problems breathing and had a lot of respiratory and lung issues during that whole bout as well. And, it was so bad. I couldn't drive. I couldn't go anywhere. I couldn't work. I practically couldn't leave the bathroom because my body was just continuously evacuating itself, for lack of any non-gross terms. And it was rough. There was about 3 years where I didn't leave the bathroom while I was searching, figuring out what to do, with a newborn. And it was difficult, trying all different things. Like I said, all different kinds of pills and all different kinds of supplements and different preparations from all over the world, because at that point I was out of options and out of time, and I was just trying anything. And basically a miracle happened and culminated again. My neighbor at the time was Lawrence Ringo, who is the godfather of modern day CBD. And I had spoken with Dr. Rick Simpson, and this is prior to Phoenix Tears and people knowing about RSO. He's the one that really told me that I should try cannabis oil extract, and that it is actually different than consuming it through inhalation or just normal edibles. And he told me a basic way to prepare it with naphtha, actually, which is toxic and banned in California. So I used grain alcohol and made this preparation that everybody knows as RSO today in a very crude form. And so that was the beginning of the healing for me. And after about a month of taking that RSO that I made out of my THC flower, which I was cultivating at the time on my property in Humboldt County, along with my food and whatever else we were doing on the farm, I had some chem dog. I turned it into oil, and I took that for about 30 days, according to what Rick Simpson had told us to do. And it was helping, and it wasn't perfect, but it was helping. After that 30 days.
What did you notice that after a couple of days of taking it?
After about 2 weeks, see, I had severe cramps and shooting pains and all kinds of neurological pains.
Mm-hmm.
And so that subsided or deadened. That was the biggest thing that I noticed after the first 2 to 4 weeks. I was still having real problems with digestion and bowel issues. And, there was still spasms and still a lot of issues that were going on there. The thing, I fast forwarded, I was going through these symptoms for about 7 to 8 years before I was actually diagnosed. It took 4 doctors in 4 different counties to actually find the diagnosis and get me into the direction of talking to a gastroenterologist in the first place, and that's when I tried all the Western medicines, steroids, the antibiotics, different hormonal therapies and different things that they have that doesn't really do anything, but it was worth the shot. So, the THC oil was showing promise. And prior to this, Lawrence had decided to connect with a woman, Samantha Miller, who owns a lab, Pure Analytics, that I think they just celebrated their 12th or 13th year in the legal market, but she's been going far longer than that. And my neighbor was looking for the highest THC content flower that he had, because that's, still, even in that day, that's kind of where everybody was at. And so he was just trying to blow everybody's doors off using analytics. And what he ended up finding out was, 40 out of his 60 strains that he tested was actually very high in CBD, and higher in CBD than anybody had seen at that point. People thought that they had high CBD if they had 1 or 2%, like Whamp's a Stinky Purple, and there was a few out there that people thought was hot stuff. And then all of a sudden, Ringo's got 15, 18% CBD cannabinoid and up in the 20% cannabinoid content. We were like blown away. And so this was all going on while I was dying, while we were trying to figure out what was good for me. Samantha gave us a lot of information about how cannabinoids interact with our biology and why I should be trying CBD along with my THC, and that maybe this could break the cycle of the autoimmune response. She was really the one that sort of added that extra component. And after about the 30 days of me taking this THC was right around the time when Ringo had his first seed plant that actually got tested, and we found the Sour Tsunami, which was a 3-to-1, 15% CBD and 5% THC. And that seed plant, because of her recommendation, was what I made my first batch of 2 ounces of oil from. He took the seeds, he gave me a few, but he took the seeds and I made the oil, and I took that oil, for the next several months. But after 2 months of taking that, there was a day that I woke up and I actually forgot that I was sick. And that's a very big deal when you have autoimmune disease, because you always know you're sick. My intestines always felt like they were sagging, like they were falling out of my stomach. It was a very strange feeling. And here I am, I wake up, I'm okay. I went to the bathroom and didn't even think about it. Usually I went to the bathroom and that was my day. I got stuck if I wasn't sleeping there. So it was a very strange feeling to come to this realization that all of a sudden, it was like a switch went off. Was I perfect at that point? No, but this was a major change that happened all of a sudden after a very slow set of changes. And then basically for the next year, I continued to take these large doses of this sour tsunami oil. I was very scared at that point. I had almost died a couple times. It was probably overdoing it, now that I know better, but I was afraid. And after that year is when I started tapering down. And then I kept tapering down till I got it to about a quarter of the dose that I was on. And then I tapered down eventually to where I am now, where I'm taking about 90 to 100 milligrams of the Rosette Wellness line's balance formula, which is what comes out of all of this. The balance is the formula that I created for myself and other people with severe autoimmune disease coming out of, my bout. And I didn't have it back then. I used the straight extract, but working with thousands of patients ever since, I realized that RSO, everybody wants it and it's great stuff, but it's very hard to use. It's not accurate to use. You waste it a lot. You take too much, you take too little. And now we know better. We know we need a lot less at a time. And so that's where the tincture line comes from. So I can just say real briefly that once I helped myself, there were so many people that I had encompassed around me to get advice from and to get plants from and to help me do different things, that when they saw what happened, all of a sudden they wanted help for their family and friends. And that started escalating to the point where Ringo and I started getting requests from, 100 plus critically ill patients a week for different extracts and advice. And we weren't doctors, so we were just giving away tons of oil. We figured if we gave it away, that this was helping. We weren't giving direct advice. We weren't selling anything to anybody. We were afraid to sell anything because this is medicine. We were all hiding what we were doing at the time because extracts still to the federal government are considered the same as manufacturing something like heroin. And so the penalties were very severe, and it was it started to get very crazy with how many people were coming our way. And it was right around 2012, and Ringo passed away from cancer himself. He was so busy and so crazed with helping people that he literally didn't take care of himself right up until he just dropped dead. And it was horrifying. It came on quick, and it really shocked and scared a lot of us because he didn't end up taking his own medicine. He ignored a lot of the signals of disease when it came on, knowing better. And it kind of was a wake-up call for all of us that you can't have your head down so much that you don't pay attention to yourself. So that was a real shocker. And it was right around that time that I formalized things. I created a tincture line for patients because we had so many patients coming our way. Ringo was now very high profile. I was starting to be known, which was scaring me. And I wanted my product to be available to patients and be in stores. And so ultimately, we started the tincture line very simply with a 1-to-1 and a 20-to-1. We expanded that and added the 3-to-1. And then we were literally the first people that I've ever seen to incorporate the full acidic cannabinoid, full spectrum products, the CBDA, the THCA. We had that very early on. And these were not crude infusions. These were actual acidic extractions. And then we started doing the blends after that as we started having better and better results and started to work with more and more doctors and nurses that were able to utilize things like assisted living centers to really do better studies for us. And, then Prop 64 happened. We ended up getting hit with all kinds of licensure and compliance, and it just took forever to get up to speed, took years. And that kind of leads us to where we are today. We're still a patient-first company. We still do a lot of compassion care, and all of our hash and adult use products on the Rose Exotic side and our bulk input side supports what we do for the Rosette Wellness medical products. So that's the basic synopsis.
I want to touch on a bunch of things. For everybody listening, I want you to, because you really just kind of glassed over it, but I want you to talk about what makes Rosette Wellness different as far as their extraction methodology goes, and talk a little bit about what we're currently seeing in the market vis-a-vis more crude extractions versus, you know, these acidic extracts that you're able to offer through Rosette.
So, you know, many discoveries were made by us and me specifically along the journey of healing myself. And that's what I really expanded on to create the Rosette Wellness tincture line and any of the medical products that we've made. A lot of people don't realize, but in the 215 days, because it was easier and you could put products out a lot faster. We did test everything, but it was just easier from a compliance standpoint. We made capsules, we made topicals, we made all kinds of things, but we kept it very simple and concise because this industry is developing and getting crazy, especially in California, which I guess we'll talk about in a while. But, you know, the reality is that simplicity is why we only have our tincture line, and we have 9 tinctures so that I can cover a lot of bases, both topically and orally. And so our products are different in that they're an actual full spectrum. Full spectrum is a word that gets thrown around a lot, and everybody has their own definition. But, you know, being one of the first people to actually talk about full spectrum, you know, I definitely have a version of it that I believe in to hold true, and that is what we're trying to do is take all of the constituents that are desirable and lift it off of the plant material, suspend it in MCT oil to present to the patient, unadulterated, keeping all the molecular bonds intact that we can, and keeping all the compounds in there that we can. And what that specifically means is when you deal with other types of extractions, it doesn't make it bad, it just makes it very different. CO2, for instance, a lot of people rely on because they think it's a clean extract, which for the most part it is. But what you're doing by design is you're intentionally fractioning or separating. Each CO2 extraction, a set of equipment by design, has different vessels to intentionally separate different parts of the spectrum. You're dropping out the lipids into a container. You're dropping out the cannabinoids into a container. You're dropping the terpenes out into a container. There are units that'll do this. You have to reset your separation valves and your equipment settings and so on each time. And you do a single pass, and each pass it'll pull different stuff off the material. Or there's a single pass method where it can do all of it and just drop it out into these various containers as it goes by design. So by design, you're twisting and distorting because of the very high pressure that it takes to do this, minimum of 1800 PSI or higher. Some people use heat and so on. And by design, you are chopping pieces of that molecular chain off, putting it into containers, and then throwing away parts of it, combining parts of it at man's will, right? Then you've got something like hydrocarbon. Hydrocarbon is doing something similar, but it's very precise, and it only takes certain things off the plant matter for the most part. I'm simplifying this so the experts that watch this, I don't want to see DMs. But the reality is it's a solvent that is very particular, and it takes very specific things off the plant material, which is why you see these amazing live resins that have a tremendous amount of terpenes and flavonoids along with the cannabinoids, and they crash them out intentionally, meaning they usually crystallize THC, and then you're left with a separated goo of sauce that they usually mix back at their own formulations. They'll take that and use it for other things. They'll use it for flavorings. They'll use it for cartridges. But the point is they're intentionally separating things, or intentionally only taking parts of the plant material, leaving parts of the plant material and part of the constituents behind, and only giving you what they're trying to get, which is mainly terpenes and cannabinoids that are now not molecularly bonded, and some of the things that are important to make them work are now missing and left behind. You've got solventless. Solventless by design, we talk about trichome separation, whether it's done through dry sifting with screens, shaking plant material through different screens, and separating different parts of the plant material. You're doing that when you're doing a water extraction, you're doing that with water and ice generally, and you're intentionally sifting different parts, and you're doing what they call step down filtration through different size openings of different size screens and catching different parts of the plant. And by design, again, you're only getting, the ultimate goal is to get the round ball from what they call a stipple capitate trichome. All the other constituents and all the other types of trichomes, the ultimate goal is to wash that and leave that behind, so you're just left with just that ball, just that, the top of the stipple capitate, so you can then inhale that, cook with it, or squish that and make rosin out of it. And so you are getting the full spectrum of what's in that head, but you're not getting the full spectrum of what's on the plant. So then you get to something like ethanol. Now, ethanol, if you do it at room temperature, like a lot of people do, or they do it warm, they're trying to get every damn thing they can off that plant, because their ultimate goal is to put it through very sophisticated equipment and polish the molecule down to just the THC or just the CBD, and that's what they call distillate. And that's, you know, very clean, clear material, but there's no other constituents in there. You get down to ethanol, full spectrum extraction like we're doing, there's a lot of different ways to do it, but the main design is that you cryo freeze everything, which locks up the water contaminants and the fat and the lipids, so that the ethanol cannot lift it off of there. Ethanol is a very poor extractor of lipids as well as water solubles if it is frozen, because it's frozen. And so we cryo freeze the material, we cryo freeze the ethanol, we keep it in a cryo environment. We do a special gentle wash. We now have what would be defined as a traditional tincture in acidic form. You now have all the acidic forms of what was naturally on the plant. Now, this is the actual full spectrum, because it's not as targeted as BHO, as hydrocarbon. It's not as restricted in targeting as CO2. It's not specific by just taking the tops of the stipple capitates like solventless. You're washing off all of the constituents that are desirable off of the surface of that plant, all the various types of trichomes. So now you're getting all of the cannabinoids, the terpenes, the flavonoids, the enzymes, most importantly, the metabolites that are required for your body to process this stuff in both your lungs and your body, naturally produced by the plant to help break this down and feed it to your body. There's vitamins, there's minerals, there's enzymes, there's all kinds of things that are on that plant that are desirable to ultimately create the real full spectrum that gives you the real entourage effect that the Israelis talk about, the orchestral effect of all these compounds working in unison throughout your body to give you the highest efficacy for the most amount of people, for the most amount of ailments, with the smallest dosages. And by the extraction method that we use and the separation of the ethanol, which is the big trick, everybody has trouble separating the ethanol without losing everything. They heat it too much, they use too much vacuum, there's a number of different errors that are made, and they end up with a good oil, but they lose a lot of these constituents. So through a lot of trial and tribulation, through a lot of experimentation and customized equipment, remember I did this all by hand to get the same quality for many years during 215. We're now able to separate the ethanol from the extract in its pure raw form without any of the garbage that comes with a direct infusion, which is something we haven't talked about yet. And we can either decarboxylate that and turn it from an acidic cannabinoid, the THCA, the CBDA, into a THC or a CBD. We'll briefly touch the other way that people do this is they take cannabis and soak it in a cooking oil, such as MCT or olive oil and other oils, and it's heated, or even if it isn't, you end up getting all the fats and waxes and water contaminants in it. And now it has everything in there, so to speak, but there's too much in there, and there's no way to remove the chlorophylls and all the water soluble contaminants, and the fats and waxes are permanently melted in there, which somebody with autoimmune disease or cancer could actually go the other way for them because it's causing negative effects in certain respects. So that's what really makes us different, is through a lot of trials, through working with tens of thousands of patients, and really going by common sense, which is that you don't see anybody using CO2 or hydrocarbon or solventless in bench tests or laboratories or clinical studies. It's always ethanol. It always has been, and it probably always will be, because it creates the best fingerprinting of a botanical that you're looking to study. And that's what we know right now. Man doesn't know better than Mother Nature, is my belief. And that's reflected in our medicine. We try to present what's medicinal about the plant and not do any separation or fractioning, and suspend that in an MCT oil so it's easy for a patient to actually dose themselves and not overdo it or underdo it.
So then let me ask you this, in doing that, and with such little manipulation, are you reliant upon specific genetics to be able to achieve these repeatable effects?
That is part of the magic, yes. We have specific strains that we use to create each of these formulations. And in the case of our 1-to-1, 3-to-1, 20-to-1, which we call number 1, 3, and 20, as well as our THC, our CBDA, our THCA, those are one plant, one strain of one plant that we grow, and we extract it in different ways, but we're able to maintain that spectrum. And then then it comes down to, do we decarboxylate it, right? The THCA is our THC formula, not decarboxylated.
Yeah.
The CBDA formula is our number 20 formula, not decarboxylated.
Yeah.
And then you've got the blends, which are a combination of all of those.
And so what's been the response like as far as Rosette Wellness in the market? Like, this seems to me like a unique product offering. Like, has it been met with much response?
Well, it's a complicated question. In the 215 era, we were able to basically go straight to patients. As a patient, we went to hundreds of events, and we reached out directly to patients. We were able to service directly to the patient. 215 in California was a much different time.
So for the people, just to interrupt you, Harry, for the people that are listening that don't have a sort of insight or a line of sight on California and what's taken place over the last 20 years, I think it was 96, 215 came about. Can you talk a little bit about that time and what it was like to be in the scene at that point?
You bet. Prior to 95, there was medical cannabis going on, and it became very evident when AIDS exploded in the United States, especially in the gay communities. And living in California, the Castro in San Francisco is known as a place where it's safe to go live, it's safe to be yourself. And so, the lifestyle of being openly gay and LGBTQ and just everything in between, it was totally accepted. And so in a lot of respects, we have a lot we owe a lot to that community, because they're so open and they are a live and let live type of community. they're very accepting of alternative medicines such as cannabis. And they were the first community, in my opinion. I mean, I think at that point, everybody knew that they thought that it helped with glaucoma. Now we know that that's sort of a farce. And, there's a lot to go into that. But they also knew that it'll help you with cancer in that it'll make you hungry. And so hopefully you can live through your therapies and you can keep weight on and so on. And at that point, that's basically the majority of what we knew. And then AIDS hit, and boom, and the Castro was a mecca. There was just huge outbreaks in the Castro and the gay community of AIDS, and nobody understood it. Nobody knew what was going on. And they were extremely vocal all of a sudden about cannabis helping with symptoms, as well as now we're into them getting crazy therapeutics. Like any disease that they don't know what to do, doctors start throwing crazy therapeutics at it, which also made them sick as hell. And so again, cannabis helped them through that. And so this was all going on in the 80s into the early 90s. And there was a lot of things going on, I mean, in the history of San Francisco, and one of which is that Dennis Peron was very active in the gay community and in the cannabis community. And when he came back from Vietnam, he became extremely active in the legalization of cannabis right out of Vietnam, as well as working with the gay community and actually exposing that cannabis can be a potential medicine. His group is one of the first people to expose that our government, the United States government, in the mid-70s conducted a lot of tests for cancer and other diseases with botanicals, cannabis being one of them. And that is why our government actually has patents on cannabinoids for medicinal purposes, which is part of the ridiculousness of our government also saying that there's no medicinal value, which is why it's a Schedule I drug. This is a conversation that could go on for days, obviously, but it all matters in why this happened. And so Dennis Peron was a genius in that he studied American history. He did know that cannabis was medicine after talking to a lot of people. He believed in it. He saw it help his community. And he worked with lawyers to come up with an initiative, which in California, a ballot initiative constitutionally is very powerful. Nobody from the government can overturn it, and the governor has to sign it, just like other states, they don't. But in California, if it gets through as a majority, they have to. And so Dennis Peron was very, very smart in studying prohibition and the end of prohibition. And a lot of people don't realize, and I did not at the time until I studied prohibition after 215 had passed in California, that the end of prohibition happened the same exact way. A lot of people don't realize that there was a pharmacist for every 20 people or something like that during prohibition. And the pharmacists were allowed to prescribe like doctors back then. And you could go to a pharmacist and get recommendations for different medicines. And one of the medicines was alcohol. And they prescribed, you could get like a pint a day or something like that. And a lot of these pharmacists then had access to the breweries and the distilleries that were shuttered by prohibition. And they went and they filled their bottles for prescriptions. And they had this, medical system where people got a recommendation from their pharmacist and got their daily allowance of alcohol. And ultimately, the system broke down. The federal government, left it up to the states. The states all unanimously voted, and it was overturned within like 3 months, I think it was, and prohibition was lifted. And this was the basic framework that Dennis Peron worked with. That I had no idea that that's how prohibition ended. I had no idea that prohibition, during the United States alcohol prohibition, people were able to get alcohol as medicine from a pharmacist. I had no idea. So that's what ended up happening in the mid 90s. It did pass unanimously. And what a lot of people don't realize about Proposition 215 is it's actually not a law or a regulation. It's a jury statement that was accepted by the state of California. And what that means is if you go to court, you're allowed to finally, but prior to this, you were not allowed. And if you got caught by the feds, you were not allowed to use a medical defense. You couldn't talk about it. So this allowed you to use a medical defense in the state of California. That was the big deal. People thought it was a law, a regulation. People thought that the rules on the books, the laws on the books, where you could grow 100 plants per patient, you were allowed to start collectives. None of that actually existed, but the state did look the other way. And so because this jury statement existed, law enforcement didn't really want to bother going after people because you couldn't really indict people. This was tested in court a few times. The police had to give back the flour, they had to give back the money. Sure, there's exceptions to that, but overall it was a pain for the police. And so it became a free-for-all in California for cultivation, black market, you name it. And that was paralleled and in the guise of medical cannabis. And now you've got all these stores blowing up all over the state. It started in 1995. And Dennis Perone had a little shop in San Francisco that a lot of us dropped off our spare material, our flowers, or our shake, our trim, or whatever. And his club would sell it to people for cheap. Brownie Mary made edibles and gave it away to cancer people and AIDS patients. That eventually got to the point where San Francisco allowed people to open dispensaries. The Harborside boys, the D'Angelo brothers, were testing the system. They opened up a dispensary called Harborside in Oakland. You know, there was federal interactions, and there were more and more people testing the system and opening dispensaries, both with the city's blessings and without the city's blessings. And, you know, it just escalated and escalated and escalated. And more cultivators grew bigger and bigger and bigger under the guise of growing for medicine. Everybody said they were growing medicine, but you know, probably 90% of it was black market going all over the world. A good amount did end up in the stores, and because it was so free, we actually had over 12,000 stores in the state of California. There was a very robust, healthy market, and it really was dampering the black market in California itself. People that would normally get black market were now enjoying going to a store and having a whole variety of things to choose from, and they could buy packaged edibles that they couldn't get from their street dealer. They could get 6 different kinds of flour and different kinds of hash and so on. So it really was working for a minute there. And yes, there was probably just as many illegal stores at the time doing nefarious things, dealing with other countries and exporting. There was some bad stuff going on, but for the most part, towards the end of 2015, we had a very robust market, and we did have enough distribution and stores. And then here comes Prop 64, and that blew up all the stores. You know, we're down to probably 600 stores again. We lost a few hundred stores at the end of the year because of the current environment. And so the whole market kind of collapsed, and so did the access for patients. Even though all the stores were primarily helping patients as a ruse to be able to sell tons of adult use products, we still had better access. Patients still could get real medical products, and the stores humored us and allowed us to sell high dosage stuff and would stock this stuff, and we could send a lot of patients. Now it's so expensive, and nobody even thinks about that anymore. So it's a lot more difficult doing medical now than it ever was, you know, is the truth of it.
Did the product mix suffer, like 215 to 64? I think I know the answer, but the diversity of product that was available to the consumer, like, was that an immediately felt thing overnight?
Overnight, it deflated. You know, it was funny because all of a sudden, all of us that that were serious in the old days, all of us got a license. And the last thing you do is you sign a piece of paper that's an affidavit that says that you're never going to do anything illegal again, basically. And so that means you're not allowed to deal with a lot of the stores that you were dealing with that didn't make it, that weren't getting, and they were still operating. There were hundreds of them. And there were some big players that chose to do it. And I was too chicken shit to do it because we seem to always get picked on. You know, the most legitimate people seem to get picked on the most for whatever reason. We don't have K Street lobbyists and we're not greasing politicians down. We're simply helping patients. So yes, quality and variety disappeared literally overnight. And when the stores first opened, Jameson, there was only a couple of products on the shelf throughout the whole state. And most of it, there was like a topical. And if you were lucky, somebody had some flour. Yeah. And it wasn't necessarily good, but nobody had packaging. Nobody got their shit together at the beginning of 2018 like they were supposed to. Some of the biggest issues were that the regulators didn't give us proper guidance. They didn't give us a sheet that says all your labels must contain exactly this, or they're not compliant. They didn't give enough guidance to the laboratories, and the laboratories were failing a lot of people for label claims that they would not fail people for now. And so there were dozens of people that were off market for there was an initial extinction event, July 2018 and August 2018. July 1st, 2018 is when packaging laws came in strict. And, you know, a lot of brands disappeared until about September. And during those first 3 months, there was nothing on the shelves, just empty dispensaries and a jar of topical and maybe a jar of flour, and that was it.
And what happened next? What did you start to see? Was it a transition of, you know, larger legacy players into the legal space, or was it fairly new faces coming in to occupy that shelf space?
Legacy players then started to get their stuff together and get their labels and their packaging together and retesting and getting what they needed to get onto shelves. Again, they weren't very clear with these transitions, and a lot of people made a lot of legitimate mistakes, and that cost people months. Things happen like if you failed a label claim, again, that wouldn't fail nowadays by today's standards, that whole batch or those several batches were tied up in regulatory red tape to get remediated for 90 or 100 days. So do you make another batch and try to do it again? Or, because you've got hundreds of thousands of dollars worth of product tied up in remediation. It was a mess. So a lot of people, including us for some products, had to get through this packaging remediation to meet compliance. And then you started to see a lot of the old brands reel back in and start to hit the shelves again very slowly. We were some of the first back. And then definitely there were brand new brands that started from ground zero, but not many, because again, the licensing was not easy. The regulators did not know what they wanted in order to give you a license. And it took them about a year to figure that out, that they should give out provisional licenses, which they no longer do as of March 1st, I think it is. So now, if you applied, unlike then, you have to have everything completed before you start operating. Whereas back then, they gave you some benefits of the doubt, allowed you to operate while they figured stuff out, while you figured stuff out, and eventually that came to an end. And so basically, yeah, that's when the new brands started. The people that started right then had a big advantage because they got to start clean companies, clean entities. Whereas in the 215 era, we were all told to operate as a nonprofit. And we were told to have cannabis touching entities to have, to be legal and to have everything accounted correctly. And that ended with 64. Yeah. All of a sudden, the regulators, the IRS, which is the United States tax authority, wanted to see everything under one umbrella. They didn't care. They basically said everything's flattened out, so you might as well put everything under one entity so that we can see how everything works here, where, you're not fooling us anymore, and we know you're making profit. We're going to let you do this, but, stop it. And so a lot of us had, in order to have Rosette in the Prop 215 era, we had about 5 entities, they all did different things.
Yeah.
Now, we're down to just a couple. And so that creates a lot of mess with accounting and paperwork and just legacy crap. Whereas if you started right now, you could just start a company, pull a license, do your payroll through the company, do your banking through the same company, because there is cannabis banks now.
Yeah.
And it's just a lot easier and cleaner. They have a lot bigger of an advantage coming on as a clean company. So that was very difficult for us legacy players, that transition, because we were forced to do business in one way, and then we were told we couldn't do it that way, and we had to do it a different way.
Yeah. And so where's the market at today? Like what's happening currently? Like, I mean, I have a bit of an insight on it, but I'd love to hear your point of view.
Well, the market today in California specifically is very expensive to operate, meaning that if you have a license, and keep in mind, I have several now. I have cultivation and type 6 extraction manufacturing, along with full distribution and non-storefront delivery. Those are all different licenses with different disciplines and different regulations that go through different regulators. I have to deal with 4 different regulators to have those licenses, along with local authority, which consists of the planning department and the building department. We have to comply with the California Department of Fish and Wildlife, our local water board and the regional water board, state water rights. If you're cultivating, you have to go through an archaeological study, because we live in a historical place in a wilderness area. Where I cultivate is like going on a 60-mile hike and living there. So I live in the middle of nowhere, and they take it very seriously in California when you are growing anywhere. So the Department of Fish and Wildlife had to sign off on my cultivation. Water rights had to sign off on my water. The Indian Nation had to sign off on my site and make sure that I was not cultivating on historical or holy land. And, that still happens to this day. All of that is unbelievably expensive.
Absolutely.
And then you put that on top of the fact that you have to engineer everything, right? Everything has to be engineered and wet stamped, regardless of the license type. At the county level, regardless of location, you're paying for your licensure in one way or another. And in Humboldt County, we have Measure S, which some people call an excise tax, some people call it tax. I call it a license fee, because it's based on, in order to have a license or a permit in the county to have mixed light, even though I'm not using high-powered lighting, I'm just pulling tarps, they call it mixed light, and I have to pay $2 a square foot, which is very expensive. And that happens once a year. You have to pay that. To the state, you also have a licensor, which is a mixed light license, as well as our manufacturing license, as well as our distribution and retail. So all of these have local licenses and state licenses. We have to pay for our water board certificates every year. Those are thousands of dollars a year. We have to pay for inspections. If they come to inspect, we pay for that.
Is there any other perishable, farmable product in California that's treated anything remotely at this level, or is this unique to cannabis?
I don't think that anything anywhere is treated like this, maybe with the exception of cultivation of opiates for pharmaceuticals. which is done under lock and key and very restrictive, cultivation methods. But this is like nothing else. I mean, it's very easy for a farmer to say, man, if I was growing artichokes, I would never get taxed. This is not. This is a Schedule 1 narcotic, so I can't fool myself. The biggest issue is it needs to be decriminalized at a federal level and descheduled and treated like other crops that aren't, tobacco is pretty restrictive, right? Production of alcohol is pretty restrictive, but it's not like cannabis. Alcohol in the United States is a great example because you go through a lot of hoops and a lot of legal discretion and vetting to get your alcohol distribution license to be able to sell alcohol to the public or to be able to produce alcohol. But then that's it. You might get inspected once in a while, but you literally pay for a license once, and that's it. Some states like California have to renew every 10 years. That would be amazing for us. It's very self-policing and so on. So no, it's very expensive. It's too restricted. And some people would believe that the state is doing this intentionally to get down to just a handful, maybe a half dozen corporate players that are accustomed to playing ball in this crazy fashion so that they can really get a handle on it. I don't know whether that's true or not. It certainly feels like that. It certainly feels like, and we've seen recent news that there were players that were involved with our community and converting it to Prop 64 mentality that actually were working with the governor's office and part of the government. And so it is highly suspicious. And there's a lot of reason to believe that they're trying to knock out the Emerald Triangle in particular, because it's particularly aggravating to them. It's very Wild West, and it can't be regulated in the same way because we don't cultivate in the same way up here. They've had to make concessions for us up here for cultivating, such as using ponds, redefining ponds in a way that makes it acceptable for us to use water sources the way we've been using for 40 years. So.
Let me ask, I want to, before I go forward, actually, Harry, I want to go back and I want to talk a little bit about Ringo and your relationship with him. I think that not enough people know about that person and who he is and what he did. And I wondered if you could touch a little bit on who he was as a person and how your relationship developed once you met him.
Well, Ringo was definitely a very special person, as it turns out. Just like a lot of us, he ended up here to live off the land, to grow cannabis, and basically just live free like a pioneer, which in Humboldt County, a lot of people don't know this, but there are ordinances on the books that allows us to live like a pioneer as long as we don't hurt our neighbor, which is unusual. We all came out and built homes and so on without permits and have ecosystems without normal permitting. And as long as we're stewarding our properties properly and not hurting our neighbors, we were left alone. And this ordinance was put on the books in the 70s by the hippies, and a lot of people were abide by this, and certainly myself and Ringo and everybody in my little community, which is what they call a subdivision. A lot of people think of like an urban or suburban, track houses as a subdivision, but in our case, it's 76 40-acre parcels in the middle of nowhere and dirt roads and so on. And so Ringo, again, moved out to live off the land. He had quite a wild ride himself to get to that point. He had been there during the 70s and left when camp really got heavy. Camp is the Campaign Against Marijuana Plantations, which started basically in late 70s, early 80s, and was basically almost a military operation where they came in with helicopters and machine guns and raided people, guns drawn, cut their plants down. And this was eradication, right? They cut everything down and wrecked everything and left. They didn't arrest people in general. you know. This was just get rid of it. These people are criminals. This is poison. Let's cut it down and burn it kind of thing. So he left during that. He went to Colorado, but this is long before Colorado was legal, and ended up coming back to Humboldt and living on the property in the subdivision that was very close to my property in the subdivision. So Ringo was a black market guerrilla grower back in the day, one of the few around. You know, there was very few people out in the hills back then compared to now. Even though we had a big exodus because of legalization, there was still a lot fewer people in the subdivision back then. And he transitioned, like myself, into growing only CBD medicine. And the first time that I met Ringo officially, I had seen him around the subdivision and at gatherings. We have a little town hall, very historical little town, Bloxburg. Bloxburg was one of the last stops on the Pony Express before they headed down what is the Redwood Highway, which is now 101, and going down to San Francisco. So we were kind of like a stopover, and we had general store and 4 saloons and a hotel and a lot of different things that are not there anymore. The skeletons of them are there. But where I live is literally a little old west town, and there's about 80 people there now, and most of it is owned by 2 families still, but some of us do own land there. So I met Ringo because I ended up getting into an accident when I was very sick. I rolled my truck. So this is, you know, like I said, I had seen him around. We all knew each other. We all took care of each other. We all warned each other when the cops were coming. But the first time I actually really sat down and became good friends with him was when I wrecked my truck. I was very sick, on a lot of steroids, and I wasn't really the best driver at the time because of it. I rolled my truck. Ringo drove by right afterwards because he lives right near me. He yanked my truck off the hill and helped me get it back on the road and sort of, you know, got me back on my feet. I had to get, you know, I totaled the truck as it turns out and got a new truck at that time. But that was my first big interaction with him. And, you know, he sat me down and we smoked a giant joint. And that's when we first started really shooting the shit, talking about our cultivation practices and becoming friends. And that was, you know, right around the time when he started doing his investigating and seed selection and becoming more serious about his cultivation and trying to figure it out through actual testing. You got to remember, this is before testing. Steep Hill didn't exist. CW didn't exist. Samantha's lab, Pure Analytics, didn't exist at this time. So he was relying on Samantha, who was quantifying her own test procedures at the time in order to do this seed selection. And like I said earlier, this is what led into him discovering that he was sitting on CBD strains. Now, everybody at the time that was around him was growing tons of black market high THC flower. This is when Blue Dream this is right around when Blue Dream hit the market. And people were growing these monster plants and just wanted higher and higher THC. And here Ringo starts going in a different direction, and everybody thought he was crazy. And that is right around that time that I told you the story where I helped myself. I immediately flipped a switch and started growing CBD medicine myself, a couple of THC plants off to the side. But all of a sudden, we switched our entire income, our entire crop to CBD to start helping patients. And he did the same thing with his seeds. And the thing that makes it so special is there was a lot of people at the time that started looking at their seed stuff. And the people who let out eventually the Canatonic and the guy that discovered the Harlequin, Wade. A lot of these people were holding this stuff tight. They weren't giving it to anybody. They wouldn't let anybody have it. And I'm like, this is crazy. And Ringo was the same way. And so Ringo just started giving away high CBD seeds. And a lot of people were helping him with this journey, such as Dr. Courtney. Dr. Courtney brought back the best form of AC/DC that we got a hold of from France, gave it to Ringo, gave us, a handful to Ringo, gave a handful to myself. We went at it. Ringo back-crossed everything he could with AC/DC and started raising CBD levels. And it just kept getting higher and higher and higher and higher and higher until he was up into the high 20 percentile of CBD when people couldn't even get THC that high. And again, he was just giving this away. He felt bad charging for it. He didn't really want to be responsible for telling people how to use it because it was so risky back then. And, the famous story is that himself and Rachel Smith, who is a hero unto herself, definitely an unknown hero,
Absolutely.
held our genetics. That's a whole other side story, but she helped hold our genetics after we made selections from seeds. So the two of them went down to the first San Bernardino High Times event, where guys that we know, the Stanley brothers who started Charlotte's Web, bought a clone and seeds from Ringo's booth. And that was the original Charlotte's Web, was a combination from a male plant seed that they got, crossed with the female clone that they got from Rachel. And there was your Charlotte's Web. And Charlotte's Web was a cannabis drug plant for the first several years. Now they've done their own thing. They have engineered hemp and stuff. It's not the same thing. But as you can see, Ringo gave this stuff away primarily, and he wanted to spread it to make it go as far as he could to give it away because he knew it was doing good and too many people were trying to hoard it. So he really tried to eliminate people from hoarding it.
Yeah.
It almost got him killed a couple of times.
I could imagine messing with some people's incomes. Where was his original seed stock from? Was he a world traveler? What was that? Where did he build his genetic library?
So he had a lot of local strains. There was a strain called Ferrari that nobody really has ever heard of that hit for some CBD. Also, he knew Soma, and so he got a lot of seeds from Soma. Soma had come out when he was in hiding. He came up to the hill and hung out there, and they traded genetics. He went over to Holland and got a ton of genetics from over there. Anything he could get his hands on. He collected from. He was a seed junkie, totally. And anybody that he could get seeds from, he totally collected everything he possibly could from the Albion area on the border of Mendo and Humboldt, Oregon. Once he became known as the guy that was doing this, anybody who had anything to share started mailing him stuff and coming to him. He was getting seeds from all over the country, all over the world, and he was popping seeds like crazy. And it got to the point where he almost got busted for doing stuff like this, and it was very innocent, but he would take like a bunch of these tent garages that you can buy at Costco and put greenhouse fabric over it. And he'd line a whole bunch of them up and pop a bazillion seeds, put them in 3-gallon pots, do a quick light depth, figure out whether they're male or female, separate them, just very quick turnarounds and get testing done as much as he could, just select, and just really trying to figure out what's what. And he was really starting to get somewhere, right as he was dying. He was just cranking out hundreds and hundreds of seed plants, trying to isolate the one of each category that we were looking for. During that seed selection, keep in mind, I had already recovered myself. I was working with hundreds, if not thousands, of patients at that point, and doctors, and biologists, and chemists, and nutritionists. And we were starting to hone in on different cannabinoid and terpene spectrums mainly to target, to help the biggest groups of patients for seizures, for cancer, for autoimmune diseases, mainly. And so I was feeding him information. He was looking at the test results and selecting, and we were just going for it. I did a lot of extractions and tests with patients, and he was breeding, and we were just going and going and going until he got very sick and we lost him.
Wow, that's incredible. The amount of material that you've been able to touch and see um, is just incredible to me. Just imagining, the unique expressions that you've experienced firsthand. I think that's very cool.
Yeah, it was pretty unique. A lot of the original expressions of these strains that we know today were very unique and a lot more diverse than the stabilized strains that we see today. And I am fortunate enough that the kids of Lawrence gave me sort of free pickings at his collection at one point shortly after he passed. So I got a lot of the seed stock that I needed if I need to go back and do some breeding. And I'm praying that at some point somebody allows me a facility to actually do this, because again, in this licensed market, it's such a big deal to have a plant that you can't really waste your money on seed selection. It's very expensive to have nursery space and to be able to do that, and to do that on a personal level would take you forever, because you're only supposed to do 6 plants at a time per year technically.
Yeah.
And so to do seed selection that way would be ridiculous.
Yeah.
And in the legal environment, it's very difficult. So we are doing some, but it's very slow because I'm very anal, and I'm not going to pop 2,000 seeds and do it haphazardly. It's kind of a waste. So I'm only able to do a couple strains at a time. I'm not able to do the quantities at the time that I really want to do. So hopefully I'm able to get back to it. And I do have these base forms that are normal, so I can get male and female selections and, hopefully broaden the world's library.
I think that's what we need. I mean, I think we've really seen a lot of bottlenecking with the cookie varietal and this sort of specific flavor notes that we've honed in on, and with new introduction of new novel cannabinoids and things. I think having that base material to go back to and really look through is going to provide a really unique starting point for unique new possibilities. So that's what really gets me excited. I wanted to ask you, I want to switch gears a little bit and talk about Rosette and what you guys are doing currently. And we touched a little bit on the technology and what you guys have. You guys have just released a really cool new product and called Wedge. And it's a absolutely water soluble drink infusion. And I'd love to learn a little bit more about that and how that came about.
Well, that is a long time coming. It's not something that you can just whip up in your garage, So I had the equivalent of a clean room, on the mountain where I was producing my original tinctures and extractions and formulations, and that's a certain amount of technology, and it's pretty advanced. But when you get to the point where you're now creating water solubles and a dry powder product, it requires some advanced technology that I wasn't prepared to purchase. It's in the hundreds of thousands of dollars to get started with things like just basic spray drying. So I did have some people experiment for me that owns equipment. And over the years, I've tried a few different ways of doing it and never was really happy with it. I really wasn't happy with what I've seen out there. People are making water solubles. This is not an original idea. But what people are doing is they're taking isolates and distillates primarily, or at best something like a CO2 extract, and turning that into a water soluble. Or they create a simple emulsion with something like a basic emulsifier like lecithin, using ultrasonic emulsifiers and things, which are okay, but ultimately it can fall out of suspension, and it's not the same type of bioavailability that I was really looking for. To me, this is a very cluttered market, and I don't want to put out anything that's going to add to that clutter. I don't want to put anything out there that isn't that couldn't be considered medicinal, regardless of the fact that this first product will be primarily launched into the adult use market, but it is and can be a medical product and is definitely considered medical grade. Everything that's in it to start with is naturally derived. We do need components that are refined, but these are all food grade, pharmaceutical grade, all botanical derived ingredients, nothing synthesized. There's no chemical surfactants or strange items that you'll find in there that we don't have to list or anything like that. There's some very basic components along with the standard cryoethanol extraction that I use in all the products, including the tinctures. And so if you're familiar with a cryo or any kind of ethanol extract, it can be very stiff, it can be very loose, depending on what form it's in and what type of cannabinoids are in it and terpenes, but it's very sticky, it's very difficult to work with. It's just like RSO. You know, we make this ethanol extract is like a very clean, very pure version of RSO, if you will. And so that's very difficult to deal with. And you can't just put it in a freeze dryer, right? It just makes a mess. It'll still be sticky. And so after many years of trial and error and making a lot of messes, frankly, and a lot of errors, working with other partners with sister labs to hopefully introduce technologies that we don't have, we finally found a partner lab that's down in the Bay Area that's very close to us. We're very friendly with them for a number of reasons. We've known these guys for a long time. My general manager went to school with one of the partners. So it was a real friendly situation where we could actually feel comfortable under a non-disclosure agreement. And these guys are different because they create extremely bioavailable products for the pharmaceutical industry. And their forte is doing that without chemicals and synthesis. And they can really, they can create something that's pretty bioavailable, like a cannabis extract, and turn it into something that's extremely bioavailable, has a very high absorption rate. I think you hear about nanotechnology and nano encapsulation and things like that. I'm not going to bother even talking about that too much in our literature. Our stuff it's actually sub-nanoparticle size. It is encapsulated, but the important thing is that it is extremely bioavailable. And so you feel it within, 15 to 20 seconds of consumption. And within a few minutes, you feel, more of the full effects. And if you drink it really fast, you'll feel a third effect as it goes through your liver. If you sip it, you're going to actually get it absorbed faster into your body more directly because of the particle size, because of the carrier powder that's being used, and the overall molecular structure of how they're able to bond that natural powder with our oil, and in return create this super dry material that once it hits liquid, right, it changes its surface tension and slowly gets heavier because of the liquid and what it's combined with, which is a natural lemon. This first go of it is actually basically crystallized lemon juice, and it is a very pure product. It's lemon juice that's crystallized with its naturally forming citric acid from it, and a little bit of its lemon oil from its rind. So it's all encompassing, and that is combined with this specialized powder form of the cannabinoids that's made from my extract. And so the end product is basically the equivalent of squirting an eighth of a lemon into a glass of water, a Coke, whatever drink, juice you want to. It could be even a cocktail. And then infusing that with the first dosage will be 5 milligrams. We tested it at 10. So we're comfortable at 10 milligrams, which is maximum per package in California. And we can have 10 of those in a package. And so that's kind of where we landed for our launch, is this super bioavailable drink enhancer that you can put into water or any drink.
Cool.
And boom.
Cool. Like that just speaks, like, I mean, as far as somebody,
we need that in Canada.
Yeah, we gotta get.
Sounds amazing.
Because
I'd love to bring it to Canada, folks. So always
absolutely
work on that. Always let me know. But it is unique because it's not distillate or isolate; it's a full spectrum.
Yeah.
It is unique because I can take all of. So the idea was to test market this. So this is a test market in the adult use market, which is very broad. We've had amazing feedback from the sampling, and the ultimate goal is to make different flavors and different forms of this for adult use, but more importantly, this will translate into all the Rosette formulas. And so we're able to create a powder form in packets of all the tinctures, including the acidic form. That's another unique feature. So we can actually have water-soluble acidics. And I think that a lot of people are going to get a lot of benefit out of that as well.
Now, talk a little bit about the benefits of acidics, because I mean, it's known to some, but I don't think it's known to most. And how are you the only one currently offering, considering offering that in an acidic form?
As far as I know, there's nobody with a drink enhancer that's going to have a full spectrum acidic cannabinoid blend like we do. This is going to come from one plant with a full spectrum, like our CBDA, our THCA. Those formulas you can look up online. And the same with our Wellness and Balance, which is going to be a blend of acidic and neutral cannabinoid spectrums.
Yeah. And
of course, we'll do our number 20. Our number 20, believe it or not, is the number one selling product that we have. And it's basically a 20-to-1. It competes with hemp, and hemp sells like crazy. Yeah. But I think when people are looking for something with higher efficacy that actually has a broader use, they tend to go towards something that's made with a real cannabis drug plant versus a hemp isolate. Yeah. So it is very unique. There is nobody else doing this. We consider this the first real full spectrum drink enhancer powder.
That's so
and I think everybody's
going to do the same one, Harry, with like an orange?
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
We have the capabilities of doing currently lime, grapefruit, orange, and we may do strawberry, but we're very careful with the ingredients, so I have to make sure that I can actually be completely consistent and reproduce it in a natural way. And especially something like the juice powder is very important to me, that it's a really high quality. And so those are what I'm limited to right now, is lemon, lime, grapefruit, and orange, and probably strawberry we have in the bag. But lemon is the most universal. Orange is the weakest flavoring because we're not enhancing it with anything unnatural, right? So we're going to work on that one for a while. And we're probably going to be coming out with things for adult use because we can, and we want to test certain products out. We'll probably come out with something like 100 milligram drink shot, which you can break down into 10 milligram capfuls. And that will be a very powerful, very sweet mix, because otherwise you're going to get blown away with cannabinoid taste, right? That's a lot of cannabinoids in there. So we're gonna do a number of things. Probably a lemonade mix, very similar to a natural version of like Country Time lemonade. That'll be infused, and you'll be able to scoop how much you want based on 10 milligram scoops, 100 milligrams per jar. There's a lot of things.
That's a great idea.
If this comes out.
I love Country lemonade.
So cool.
That'd be awesome.
So Harry, I wanted to ask you, you must have a ton of people that come to you for advice right now in the California cannabis industry. If somebody was looking to get involved in the cannabis industry, is it something that you would say, come on in and participate, or is it something you would maybe advise them to hold off against right now? What are your thoughts on that?
I think, I don't take this lightly because, this is my life. I have grown up with cannabis. I've been surrounded by cannabis my whole life. It is, I'm very, very intimate with cannabis, more so than a lot of people. I think you guys can understand that. There's all different types of users of cannabis, right? So people need to understand that I'm not just somebody that got into this for this or that. This has been a part of my life heavily since I'm about 13 years old, from cultivating to consumption to helping people to helping myself. So I don't take this lightly, but I would say that anybody that wants to get into business and start a business in California that's starting an actual cannabis business right now, they shouldn't. I just wouldn't recommend that. It's too difficult. We're all building an airplane while we're flying it. And unless you have endless amounts of money to lose and figure things out along the way and pivot when the regulators pivot and suffer when things don't go right, it's not for the timid right now. And I truly believe in my soul that one way or another, good or bad or ugly, it's going to settle out within a couple to a few years. And at that point, at least you'll have a consistent set of rules that you can go by and then decide whether you want to do this or not. Right now, we know that the circle of debt that's involved in this market, we know when the timing of the taxes and the licensure, we know that there's really no way to not lose money the way it is right now. Everybody's robbing Peter to pay Paul, no matter how big they are, no matter how many tens of millions of dollars, no matter how much you see their shiny stuff in marketing and how many commercials or football ads or whatever. Everybody's hurting right now. Whether they're openly admitting it or not, everybody's playing games to hide their suffering. And so, it would be a crazy time to come into this, and people do. They're blind to it. They're enamored by it. They want to get involved. It's definitely risky. So I would say if you can't afford to lose money or your sanity, now is not a good time to get in to the cannabis market. If you want to try to get invested in an existing and you really want to take a ride, and that's, the spirit of what you're doing, maybe you're okay with losing a little bit of money and winning in the end, winning and losing together. You may find some good legacy products and cannabis companies out there to take a ride with, but definitely do your homework. And then finally, as somebody who wants to work in the cannabis industry, this could be a good time, but you got to be flexible because a lot of companies are going to go out of business. There's a lot of people that are looking to recruit people, but they may not make it another few months. So you have to kind of accept that. But there's going to be a lot of good experience out there because California, if you pick the right players, there's a lot of expertise in a lot of different disciplines that you're just not going to get traditionally in a place like Colorado that's fairly new at this. Or even Nevada or Arizona or Michigan. There are people that move there from here, but there's a lot of knowledge to capture right now before it's gone forever. And so from a cultivation standpoint, even some of the older hashing techniques and regenerative farming techniques, these OGs are not going to be around much longer. A lot of people just are fed up. We're dying off. COVID took a bunch of people out in California because a lot of the OGs, they live naturally. They didn't get out much. And so if they caught COVID, a lot of them didn't make it. So I just think that if you want to participate, now's a good time to have some genetics passed down, some knowledge passed down before it's too late, to be honest with you. So it's kind of depressing news, in the California market right now.
I think that's fair. I mean, I think we'd rather the truth than it sugar coated. Do you see a path to solution to open up things a little bit? Like, I know retail is a huge issue, but it's overregulation. Is that at a state level, and I know you touched on it a little bit before, but sir, if you could touch on it again.
It is overregulated in a lot of ways. And by overregulating, it's just because they don't really know how to regulate this. They did have time prior to legalization. They should have seen this coming. California, the market was huge prior to legalization. You'd swear it was legal. Okay. So I feel like the politicians and the bureaucrats really got it wrong. And if they really wanted control of this thing, they should have been working on this and had a master plan for years and really wrung it out with all the various agencies, So my advice to my peers, I think a lot of people have heard me say this, that it's very dangerous as an operator, as a legacy operator, as a small operator. It's very dangerous to think that you're going to compete with these large companies that are very well funded, even though they're losing money. They still are very well funded and very aggressive, and they use tactics that are intentionally trying to put small players out of business. And they don't look at it on a personal level. It's just business. And so we all have to realize that cannabis is personal if you're a legacy operator. I'm sorry, but it is. It isn't just business. So knowing that, I tell my peers, just make sure you realize that these people are operating they do not care at a personal level. It is just business. So you have to protect yourself and your family. So don't try to go head to head with these people. Don't engage them. It's not going to work. Stay in your own lane. Don't expand. Downsize if you can. Get to the point where you have a very small group of people that it requires to operate. The less HR, the better off you are right now. HR is very expensive. The amount of insurance, the PPE, because of COVID regulations currently, don't know when that's going to change, right? Frankly, there's a lot of PPE involved anyway. We have to use tons of gloves and face masks when we're producing extracts and hair nets and all this. So get as small and as lean and as mean as possible. Target and own your backyard. A lot of people try to conquer the whole state, us included. We did conquer the whole state in 2015. Times are different. There's not enough stores. The stores are being bought literally by the big players. They buy the shelves. They will pay to knock you off the shelf. They'll pay to rid the store of your product. So own your backyard, own your community. Go out and let people know who you are. Let them know that by supporting me, you're supporting somebody that lives in your backyard. And I'm going to go to the garden store and the grocery store, and I'll pay my taxes here, and I pay land taxes here. So if I exist, it helps you. That's huge. The other thing is, as small producers, the big producers, look, they're on their own. They have their own playbook, and it's a very standard playbook. Just read the Silicon Valley model, and that's pretty much what they're doing. But as small players, we really need to stick together, and we need to learn the bureaucracy, because a lot of people don't understand what it actually takes. We all complain that taxes are too high. We go to City Hall and we say, taxes are too high. That's not how laws work. We have to engage our representatives. We have to have certain votes happen locally that takes it to the state level and changes local ordinances. We have to work with our regulators and show them where we're going and what is happening to us, and literally calmly present this stuff. This takes time, but it's what's necessary to create the change from the mess that we allowed to happen, from the mess that we voted in. This is what happened. So it's very important that we understand the process and understand that one thing isn't going to help enough. Just losing cultivation tax is not enough. Just lowering license fees is not enough. The overall system is a problem. The distribution model is a problem. We shouldn't have to go to distributors to sell our product. As a small entity, we should be able to transport our own product, test our own product, and sell our own product to somebody like a store or an end user potentially. We should be able to have those endorsements on our cultivation license rather than being forced to go to a distributor and being forced to go through these other models that add costs to our overhead. You know, there are players that need that. They're bigger. They're the Budweisers and the Coca-Colas. They have manufacturing and distribution all over the place. But here is little old Harry, and there's little old companies up here, Humboldt Terp Council, and all these great little mom and pop companies that were this big. And so we don't need that kind of model. It needs to be tiered and scaled. So we have to work at that. It's not just going to happen. We have to fight for it if you care. And if you don't waste your money. Get out and either work for somebody in the business or find some ancillary thing, because otherwise you're going to lose your shirt, and it's criminal and it's painful and it's not worth it, you know? So I think we just need to band together as small producers, which I don't know how much you guys know, but this is the hardest thing for cannabis people. Everybody says we're a tight community and we're this lovey kumbaya community. But the problem is there's a million little chapters of that, and those chapters disagree with each other. And because of that, they can't come up with a consensus. It's time for that crap to end, folks. We have to put aside these minor differences and go for the bigger changes together. So that's my advice.
Man, you hit the nail on the fucking head. Like, I think we need to end it there, Harry. I mean, like,
that was really inspiring, actually. That was great.
I mean, that wrapped it up better than.
I believe this, by the way. This isn't a sermon. This is coming from my soul.
You clearly do.
Yeah,
I believe you too.
I think that's sound advice, and I think that, you know, how can people reach you? What's the best way for people to reach you?
Well, certainly they can always reach out to me on Instagram. We're at Rosette Wellness, Rosette Lab Works, Rose Exotics, and Helpful Harry. Our website is rosettewellness.com. It's RosetteWellness.com. A lot of people spell it wrong and it won't go anywhere. If you go to the rosettewellness.com, there's a sign up for a newsletter. There's contacts. And when you hit the contact button, those emails all filter through me. I monitor everything. Other people will grab different things, but certainly direct questions about, you know, medical and health issues and just help getting through health issues, or trying to find the right product, or if somebody just wants to try to partner with us. We're working on this delivery service that we're getting off the ground now that's going to be only small local producers, really craft products. That's really the best way, is through the DM or info@rosettewellness.com, which you can either write directly or go through the website. There's a number of different signups on our website for mailing lists about delivery, and our newsletter is very informative. And there's a number of ways you can reach out. I do my lives on Instagram if you want to get involved and comment and help me create topics and content that way.
We'll definitely throw it all in the bio. Harry, thank you so much for your time. Every time I talk to you.
Thank you, Harry.
Thanks for having me, guys. I feel like I've known you guys for a million years already. Can't wait to actually be able to hang in person.
Very soon, very soon.
Yeah, we'll be out to visit. Oh, that was so great, Harry. Thank you so much. Learned so much. Fantastic.
I really appreciate it, guys. I appreciate the voice, you know.
Absolutely. And we appreciate your voice, man, and the time you put in. Like, you know, it really shows, and your passion shows. And you know, I just want to provide you and people like you a podium to speak, because I think we've got so much knowledge to pass down. So, you know, I don't think this is the last time, you know, we'll do something together online, and you know, I look forward to working together with you closer in the future.
Likewise, we're here to help. My whole team is here to help in any way we possibly can.
Beautiful.
So come on down anytime.
Thanks, Harry.
Thanks, Harry.
All right. Have a great
Take
one.
care.
Peace.